Jesus is exhausted. It's not the obvious focus of our gospel reading, but it's worth noticing in passing. Last week, you recall, we read of Jesus trying to escape for a rest and to pray after a very busy time with huge crowds. But the people had worked out where he was going, and they set off around the edge of the lake to find him. And once they were there, all getting hungrier in that deserted place with nowhere to buy food, Jesus miraculously provides bread and fish for all of them, enough for 5,000 and more. Well, if Jesus's space for prayer and rest has been delayed once, it certainly can't be delayed again. And so our passage begins with Jesus dismissing the disciples into their boat and dismissing the crowds to their homes. And finally, he is able to go up the mountain to pray. Meanwhile, the disciples in the boat are traveling further from land, and the wind is getting up. But it's just a strong wind, we read, and not a storm. And this boat, after all, is in the hands of seasoned fishermen. So in the main event of our reading, it's not the wind that scares them witless. Rather, it's the sight of Jesus walking on the water. Of course, they are terrified. It's a ghost, they cry out. But no, it turns out that among the many surprises Jesus has sent their way, this is simply one more of them. Who knew that Jesus could walk on the water? Take heart, he tells them, it's me, don't be afraid. Peter, bold as ever, asks Jesus, Lord, if it is really you, tell me to come to you on the water. Jesus says, come on then. Peter puts one leg over the side of the boat and then the other, and to his astonishment, the water supports his weight. He turns round and there is Jesus close by, I've no doubt, smiling at him warmly. Peter looks right at Jesus and gently takes a step and then another. What is happening? He's actually walking on the water. And then a gust of wind whistles round the mast of the boat behind him, and he remembers the boat and the waves and the wind, and what is he doing out here? And now he falls down right under the waves before he bobs to the surface, spluttering for air and reaching out for the strong hand of Jesus that is right there for him. Oh, Peter, why did you doubt? And they climb into the boat, and the moment has passed. The wind drops, and so do all the jaws of the disciples. What did we just see? And they worship Jesus. It is such a great story. I'm pretty sure we have a few keen sailors or ex-sailors among us. But all of us who are part of a church have a link with boats in the word nave. The nave, of course, in a traditional church building is the part of the church where the congregation sits. And the word comes from the Latin navis, which was an early Christian symbol for the church as a whole. Let me show you a picture of some wonderful ship's timbers. Only, of course, they're not ship's timbers at all. There we are.
Oh, yes.
It's St Andrew's Church in Redruth, upside down. But don't they look like a ship there? And it's one of the theories as to why this nave word is used, because well, we see it more in some of our churches than others, don't we? That roof looking just like a ship's timbers. You can see how the metaphor of a ship works for the church, whether that's the whole worldwide church of Christ, but I think the metaphor works for individual ship churches too, doesn't it? Each of us chooses whether to get on board the voyage of the ship of faith or not. Together in our ship, we trust and pray that we are on a voyage towards God and towards God's purposes. Hopefully the captain who directs our course is Jesus rather than the vicar. We rely on a working crew, don't we? Though there is always a temptation to travel along as passengers just there for the ride. We travel together, whether the seas are smooth or rough. And I hope, much as a pleasant voyage in a boat is a good thing, I hope it feels good to be on board. I hope it feels safe in here, even when the storms of the world are howling and blowing us about. The storms of COVID, even the storms of terrible disasters like the one in Beirut this week. I'm sure there is a lot of helpful truth in that metaphor of the church like a ship, like a boat. But that isn't really the picture that we see in this particular story, is it? Even though there's a boat right at the center of the story. 2 chapters further on from where we are now in Matthew, Jesus says that Peter is the one on whom God will build his church. And here we have Peter being the one whom Jesus calls to get out of that relatively safe boat. Peter is willing to risk doing something which on the face of it looks bonkers, even reckless. I wonder if I were to ask you what your abiding memory of Peter in that story is. What is it when you recall this story? What is your image of Peter? Is it, let me just put this picture again. Is it Peter actually walking on the water? Because he does. He begins to walk. It really happens. But then also, that happens. He falls down under the waves. He takes his eyes off Jesus and sinks down below. And we might remember Peter as the bold one who tried and succeeded to walk on the water for a moment. But I suspect many of us, our abiding memory is of Peter who failed, Peter who doubted Jesus. In Peter, we see faith but we also see doubt. And aren't we exactly the same? In this ship of faith that we are sailing in, the temptation is to stay safe, isn't it? Completely understandable, and not necessarily to put our faith to the test, because the prospect of getting out of the boat is pretty terrifying. But staying in the safe ship may not be where God wants us to be all the time. What if God wants us to be willing to forego the safe, familiar pattern of living out our faith that we're used to? What if God wants us to step out in faith in some new way? In that story, the constant for Peter is Jesus. It's Jesus who calls him out of the boat. It's Jesus watching him, I like to think encouraging him as he takes those tentative steps on the water. But perhaps even more significantly, it's Jesus who's there to haul Peter out of the water when his faith gives way to doubt. I wonder what new step of faith Jesus might be calling us to just at the moment, particularly in this time of transition, as we have this period of working together in our two different groups of churches to work out what we believe is God's way forward for us. However challenging it might seem, Jesus is with us, urging us on and ready to catch us, whatever happens. So let us fix our eyes not on the waves, not on the things that we know make us doubt, but let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the one who calls us not to be afraid, but rather to follow him even into an unknown future. Amen.
Amen.